Celebrations have erupted on the streets of New York and other United States cities. This after news broke that Democrat Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States.
46, 46, 46, 46, 46, 46.
Several major television networks projected the Biden victory as voters narrowly rebuffed Republican incumbent Donald Trump's tumultuous leadership. Biden's projected victory came after 4 days of nail-biting suspense over the outcome of Tuesday's election, with the counting of votes in a handful of battleground states still going on thanks to a flood of mail-in ballots. Biden had a 273 to 214 lead in the state-by-state electoral college vote that determines the winner after winning Pennsylvania's 20 electoral votes to put him over the 270 he needed to secure the presidency. Biden has welcomed his victory in the United States presidential election, taking to social media to convey his thanks to those who voted him into the White House. Biden's win means that his running mate Kamala Harris will become the first female vice president of the United States and also the first black vice president. Biden tweeted that the work ahead will be hard, but promised to be a president for all Americans. Let's now go to Brooklyn in New York, where we now talk to Professor Christina Greer, Professor of Political Science at Fordham University. Professor, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Thanks so much for having me.
Are you at all surprised, shocked, or is this something that you had expected?
I'm not necessarily shocked. I mean, we have to remember, though, 70 million people did vote for Donald Trump. So 70 million Americans still wanted to continue the road that we're on. But 74 million Americans voted for Joe Biden. And in states where, because we have an indirect system of electing our president, those states put him over the magic number of 270. And a swing state like Pennsylvania was the state that delivered the final win for him. And there's still several states that need to be counted, such as Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada.
And as would be expected, Professor, the loser in an election normally concedes defeat and makes a concession speech and then calls the incoming or the president-elect and, for purposes of committing to work with the incoming president. But then this hasn't happened so far. Do you get a sense then that it'll happen at some point? Do you think that President Donald Trump will concede defeat? Because he's been saying that he's taking the matter to the courts. Do you think that he will concede defeat and work with President-elect Joe Biden in that transition?
Sadly, I don't think that he will do that anytime soon. I think we'll have to wait for all of the states to be counted. I think that Donald Trump will probably try and contest Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, possibly Georgia. He's already had several court cases thrown out. Unfortunately, the president doesn't understand fully how our court system works. Just because you're unhappy with something doesn't mean that you have a viable lawsuit. So many of his cases have already been thrown out. And also our cases don't automatically go to the Supreme Court. They have to work their way up through lower courts in order to get to the Supreme Court. So sadly, this is a president who is not committed to a peaceful transference of power. Sadly, this is a president who's been stoking animus and the flames of domestic terrorists who are in our country, who have been told that this is a fake election and these are fake results by the press conference and the press release that the president put out today. So in the upcoming weeks, I'm hopeful that the Republican Party will convince the president somehow that he needs to accept these results. He needs to accept defeat. Mathematically, it is not possible for the president to win re-election anymore. Unfortunately, the poll workers and the poll counters who have been diligently working, keep in mind, in the middle of a global pandemic, in buildings that are closed, no windows, shoulder to shoulder, counting ballots, risking their own public safety, now have to, in public health, now have to worry about their public safety with Trump supporters outside. So I'm hopeful that the Republican Party will put the country before the president. We've seen that the president is unable to do that, but we definitely need to use these next few weeks and months to think about what a transition plan looks like, not just domestically, but also internationally, since we have been quite isolationist even before COVID.
And speaking of a transition plan, we know that President Donald Trump and Joe Biden never saw eye to eye when it comes to domestic policy, when it comes to foreign policy. Will Joe Biden have the necessary gravitas or political gravitas and influence to influence perhaps the revocation of some of the agreements that the United States had made with other key stakeholders and other nations, particularly when it comes to foreign policy?
Well, I think foreign leaders are eager to work with Joe Biden. Even if they disagree with him, they'll at least have a steady hand on the ship and someone who's not as erratic. We have to remember that Joe Biden was on the Foreign Affairs Committee for many, many years. He was chosen by Barack Obama because of his foreign affairs experience. And we can pretty much assume that Joe Biden will choose someone who's the Secretary of State, who has a reputation and gravitas, not just in America, but abroad, to start mending some of those relationships with our allies that have been severed over the past 4 years. It'll be interesting to see how he deploys Kamala Harris, either in a domestic or international capacity. I'll be curious to see not just his cabinet positions, but the ambassadors. We have to rebuild our ambassador program with so many embassies across the country that are not staffed, and we don't have eyes and ears on the ground to help us build relationships and also protect us from foreign threats. I'm curious to see, I'm sorry, I live in New York City, so there are lots of sirens and celebrations going on right now. But, who will be our UN ambassador, right? So positions that we don't normally think of in the general public might all of a sudden become very important positions, right? We never really knew the role of someone, say, like a Dr. Fauci. He's worked under 6 presidents. Now he's incredibly important in the American psyche and the American public. So I think some of our international leaders who work for Joe Biden will become more household names because we want to make sure that our European, African, Latin American, South American, Asian partnerships are rebuilt. And quite honestly, we really have to think about also climate change. We've left the Paris Accord. And so we have to humbly ask if we can come back into some of these arrangements that we walked away from over the past 4 years.
Well, quite interestingly, when it comes to the key battleground states, Georgia remained an important battleground state. And you know that previously it has been a Republican stronghold. Why was it such an important battleground state? Could it have been the increase in the black electorate, perhaps?
Yes, but I'm going to say one name and you all should remember it. Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams is an African-American woman who ran for the governorship in 2018 and quite honestly was robbed. She did not win. Brian Kemp won. He was also the acting Secretary of State, and that meant he was in charge of the election process when he was running against her in 2018. Over the past 15 years, Stacey Abrams built an infrastructure in the nonprofit, private, and public sectors. She was minority House leader in Georgia, and then started a Fair Fight nonprofit that helped register over 200,000 people to vote. We've seen the reverse migration of African Americans going back down to Georgia in retirement. We've seen the increase in young people being registered to vote, Latinos being able to vote, Asian Americans moving into the state being registered to vote. And so the infrastructure she built, not just in Georgia, but also in Nevada and Wisconsin, no surprise, those are 2 other states that are in play, has been a long groundwork game that she and her team and other social justice organizations like Project South, like the New Georgia Project, have been working on for many, many years, and we're just now seeing the fruits of their labor. We would have seen it in 2018, but that election, as I said before, was theft, sadly. And so we have not seen Georgia go blue, as we call it, vote for a Democrat, since 1992 when Bill Clinton won the state. Before that, Jimmy Carter won the state in 76 and 80, but he was the governor of Georgia, the former governor of Georgia. So that makes sense. Before that, it was 1960. So only 4 times in 60 years has Georgia gone blue. And now, with their 16 electoral college votes, there's a real chance that Georgia could be in play for the upcoming years. There are 2 Senate seats. Every state has 2 senators. Georgia has 2 runoffs right now. Both seats for the U.S. Senate could possibly go to Democrats, which has not happened in decades. So this is a new day for Georgia, and we'll see how it goes and how it trends. But it's trending more purple and more Democrat every day.
Yeah. And we saw, former President Barack Obama, who made no secret of his support of Joe Biden, who often called him his friend. Remember that he was also his vice president. We also have Kamala Harris, who's also an African-American woman. So do you think that the Obama effect and the Kamala Harris effect perhaps drew the black voters to the Joe Biden campaign, or was Joe Biden himself simply appealing to the black demographic?
Well, I think, it can be both and, right? Joe Biden, though, was not only Barack Obama's vice president, he was his faithful vice president for 8 years. And for a lot of older black voters who understand what the United States has been and still is in many ways, were very impressed with the fact that he was able to play the number two to someone who's African American, to someone who's younger than he is, to someone who had less experience. And he was a great confidant. And a sense of great information to Barack Obama to assist him in his presidency. When Joe Biden also campaigned, he made it a priority to speak to black people as sort of the base of the Democratic Party. We know that people don't win without the support of black women nationwide, especially. And so the way Joe Biden campaigned with black Americans was unlike many of his competitors. And we see that they were quick to coalesce around Joe Biden because there is no path to the White House without African Americans. Obviously, choosing Kamala Harris as his running mate was a nod to acknowledge the work that black women have done and continue to do in electoral politics, helping people get elected across the country. So it's a great team. I think that there's a lot of excitement, especially not just because Kamala Harris is an African American, she's also Asian American. She's a woman. We've never had a woman in one of the top two offices in the history of the United States. In 1984, Geraldine Ferrara was on the Democratic ticket as the vice president. In 2008, you may remember Sarah Palin was John McCain's running mate. And then in 2016, there was Hillary Clinton at the top of the ticket. There are only three prior women. And for Kamala Harris to be the vice president-elect means a lot to a lot of women in the United States.
Well, no doubt she is an incredible woman and an incredible politician, but then not much is known about Kamala Harris, save for the fact that she gained national fame through her questioning of the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh and the Attorney General William Barr at their confirmation hearing. So are you at all surprised at Kamala Harris' sudden superstardom?
Well, actually, she's been in the political imagination for quite some time. She was the district attorney in the state of California. That's our largest state, in the United States. And then she was elected attorney general of the state of California. So attorney general is the sort of chief prosecutor for the largest state. And so when she ran for the presidency, she did come under some fire because of some of the decisions she made as a prosecutor. And so many Black American and Latino Americans had some issues with some of the decisions she made in the past as Attorney General. And so what people did know of her, some people thought descriptively she was fantastic and she represented a lot, but she did have some issues substantively with the past decisions she made. And that's why her presidential bid did not last very long. She's actually one of the candidates that left towards the beginning of the race. As a sitting senator, she did not last very long. We have to also remember, though, we've only had 2 elected Black female U.S. senators in the history of the United States. That's Carol Moseley Braun, who was elected in 1992, and then Kamala Harris. We've also had 0 Black female governors who have ever been elected in the United States. Stacey Abrams in Georgia would have been the first had she been elected in 2018. So when we also think about the pipeline to the presidency and the vice presidency, governors and senators are often chosen. So the pool to select from is actually not very deep. It's just Carol Moseley Braun and Senator Kamala Harris. And so as we think about moving forward, either we have to think about another way to choose talent and choose it from different places. And if not, Black women will consistently be left out of the important conversations about whether or not they can be president or vice president.
Yeah. Now, Professor Greer, the the United States remains the global epicenter of the coronavirus, and President Trump has been fiercely criticized for his handling of this coronavirus epidemic, and we see him holding a series of rallies with unmasked supporters, and he himself battled to wear a mask. In fact, he also made a mockery of those who were wearing a mask. And do you think that that was a straw that broke the camel's back? Did he shoot himself in the foot, or was it simply time for him to go?
No, sadly, I don't think that is the straw that broke the camel's back. Even with over 230,000 Americans dead and over 8 million who will be living with COVID for the rest of their lives, and we don't know what their lifestyles will look like. We also know that the Republicans are trying to take away the Affordable Care Act, which is our health insurance, and we now know that COVID would be considered a pre-existing condition. So people wouldn't even be able to get insurance coverage if they've survived COVID. So, I mean, I don't know why his supporters don't think it's real. Sadly, the president says it's not a big deal, and they believe him. Joe Biden believes in scientists and science, and so I think that was very appealing to a lot of voters. Sadly, as all the abundance that is in America, we can't seem to get this virus under control, and it's because we have two very different strands of thought. You know, if we look to the continent of Africa and how some of the 54 countries in Africa have dealt with the coronavirus, we could take a lesson. Some of those countries have a lot fewer resources than we do in America, but they're listening to science. We have not. When a president says, I don't think it's a big deal if you wear a mask, and then Republican governors repeat that messaging and it trickles all the way down to the American public, we have the numbers that we see. So I'm optimistic that Joe Biden will actually keep people in place who believe and respect science, will help us with things like contact tracing. They'll look to other nations and what they've done to curtail the virus and somehow get out messaging with governors or mandates with governors about mask wearing or whatever it may be so that we can get it under control. Because as of now, without a vaccine that the president promised, but we don't have a vaccine. So until that happens and until you convince Americans to take it, we're going to be, unfortunately, in the downward spiral that we find ourselves in.
You know, it does appear that in each and every election, Professor, there is always a scandal linking a particular, contender or a candidate or a presidential candidate. We saw back in 2016, Hillary Clinton battled her email scandal while she was still Secretary of State. And now in the lead up or in the run up to this election, Joe Biden also battled to fend off accusations of wrongdoing with regards to Ukraine and China that have been made by President Donald Trump. Do you think that those accusations were weak enough to bring him down, or did he simply weather the storm?
Well, I mean, the FBI and the sort of intelligence agencies have found no credibility to those accusations, much to the president's chagrin. So they were somewhat baseless. I mean, Joe Biden's been a public servant for over 40 years. If there was credibility, I think they would have found it at some point in time. I think the sitting president, Donald Trump, was quite angry that he had tasked people within the intelligence community to find something, and they found nothing, right? Even the allegations around his son were pretty flimsy, and the nude laptops that were being found. The interesting thing is somehow this particular president administration can seem to get away in broad daylight with theft and grift and so many other things. I'm hoping that when Joe Biden is sworn in on January 20th, 2021, we can sort of get back to some sort of respect for the American people, putting issues and policies forward that actually are of concern to the American people. What some of our polling has indicated is that people didn't care about dredging up old stories about Joe Biden's son, allegedly. People cared about the coronavirus. People cared about the recession that we're currently in. People cared about whether or not they were going to get evicted. People cared about social justice issues and what's going on with vigilante and police state-sanctioned violence. Those were the top issues that actually Americans went to the polls for, not because of scandals and alleged scandals that the president sort of throws out on Twitter, but it doesn't really have any evidence to back up.
All right, Professor Christina Greer, Professor of Political Science at Fordham University in the United States. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
To Washington, D.C. now with